Whatever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
We are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Glad to sit here at the right hand of Satan.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
We are, as a people, opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
News and information, conspiracy, prophecy, signs of the times, biblical insight. Welcome to Jim Duke Perspective Radio.
Welcome to the broadcast. My website is jimdukeperspective.com, and our sponsor is AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com for the finest in long-term food supplies and survival equipment. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. My guest today witnessed a gruesome satanic ritual, unwittingly participating in it, perhaps even targeted as a sacrifice himself. He appeared in a documentary called Detestable about satanic ritual abuse that goes on in communities right under our noses, perhaps in your own neighborhood, maybe even in your own home. Guy Kallberg, well, thank you for being with us on the broadcast to tell us what you witnessed.
Hello, Jim, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, why don't you just bring us through your experience?
Before we get started, I'd just like to say that I am not proud of anything that I've done in my past, but I am not ashamed to talk about it as long as it's bringing glory and honor to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Which, if it wasn't for him, I would not be here. So my story will start when I was about 10 or 11 years old. My parents got involved in the spiritual deliverance ministry with an organization that was out of Vancouver, Washington. We lived down in Newburgh, Oregon. And when they started getting deeper into it, the guy that, his name was Frank Solberg, that prayed for my dad, he gave my parents a file folder. It was probably about 2 inches thick. That was all actual police reports on satanic ritual abuse from the Vancouver Police Department and surrounding areas. And these are actual police reports. And I don't know if you've ever read a police report, but they're very detailed, and they don't pull any punches, if you will. And I got a hold of that, and I read the whole entire folder, which, believe you me, is something that a 10 or 11-year-old boy should not be reading. But it intrigued me about Satanism, and that's when I started studying Satanism. And I didn't study it ever because I wanted to practice it. I studied it because it's kind of like a car wreck. You know, when you see it, it grosses you out, but you can't look away.
So you're kind of interested in it.
Yeah, it really intrigued me, you know, and it was a completely foreign concept to me, and it was more, you know, like I just kind of wanted to find out what made these people tick. Because, you know, I grew up going to church and everything, so I knew about God, I knew about Jesus, but I hadn't really heard too much about Satan. And I realized even at that young age that these people, everything they're doing totally contradicted what I've been taught. You know, we're taught to love one another, and, you know, you read about the gruesome things that they do to these kids and the rituals, and it's just piqued my interest. You know, looking back now, I believe that God allowed me to take this path in life because he has plans for me. And it, you know, the better you know your enemy, the better of an assault you can mount against them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I can remember one time we lived out on 20 acres on the end of a old gravel road, and one time me and my friends were playing, and we're on the backside of our property, and we found a goat that had been sacrificed. I'm assuming it was missing its head, and it was in a black plastic bag, you know, probably about 30 yards up from the road onto our property. But it had been disemboweled. It didn't have any blood in it. And, you know, I went and got my dad and showed him, and I don't remember what came of it after that. But, you know, I'm sure because of the ministry that my parents were in, the Satanists were targeting them and doing rituals against them. And the only thing that is going to protect you from this sort of stuff is the blood of Jesus. And I know that I've been through many instances in my life where if it weren't for my parents and a multitude of other people praying for me and pleading the blood of Jesus over me because I wasn't doing it for myself, that I would not be sitting here doing this interview right now. I would be dead.
Wow.
And so when I was 14, it was a month to the day before my 15th birthday, my parents moved to the Philippines to become missionaries. They weren't supported by church or anything. They sold everything they owned and moved over there to this little island called Siquijor. And if you can find it on a map, but if you do find it, it's just going to be a tiny little speck, and most maps don't even have it on there. But come to find out, like, my parents knew this then, but I didn't know it until years later, that Siquijor happens to be the witchcraft capital of Asia. And once a year, all the witch doctors and stuff from all over Asia, and they fly in from Europe and stuff also, they meet up in the mountains of a little podunk. I mean, it's just a tiny little village called San Antonio. And that's like the witchcraft capital of the witchcraft capital, if you will. That's where all the witch doctors go to do their rituals and whatnot. But so we lived there. I was there for 5 years. My parents were there for almost 11 years. And I came home from the Philippines when I was 19, almost 20 years old. And I had acquired a lot of bad traits when I lived in the Philippines. Like, my dad kicked me out when I was 16. I lived on the streets over there till I was almost 20 because I was doing everything that he was preaching against. And so here I am, 19 years old, come back to America on my own. And, you know, I just go about living my life. You know, I was heavily involved in drugs at this point in my life. And I was, from the time my parents got involved in the spiritual deliverance ministry until present day, I believe I've been targeted by the Satanists because of what my parents were involved in. And I met Russ Dizdar in 2014 at a conference in Ohio. And I had told him a couple of stories that I'll get into here in a little bit. And I told him the stories. I didn't tell him anything about my parents being involved in spiritual deliverance or anything like that. And he told me that the reason the Satanists went after me so hard is because they couldn't get to my parents, but I was living in the world, and so they went after me because I had opened doorways to make me accessible to them, whereas my parents did not.
Right.
So when I was 19, you know, this is right after I first came home, and I was living up in Clatskanie, Oregon, and me and one of my buddies went down to Newburgh, Oregon, where I grew up at, to party with some people that I went to school with down there. And these weren't real good friends, you know, they're just kind of, we're casual acquaintances in school, and, you know, I just met them, reconnected with them through other friends. And so we went down there, and it was, I believe it was the night or 2 nights before Halloween. And we were doing crank. This is back in the days before meth. And so I had drove my one buddy, Mike, over to this guy's house to get some crank. And this guy's name was Damien, and his nickname was 666.
That's
and
appropriate.
I couldn't go in. Yeah, right. I couldn't go into his house for some reason. So I was sitting outside waiting in the car, and, you know, I was out there for probably 45 minutes, and, you know, I started getting weirded out. And so I started driving down the road, and then in my rearview mirror, I see Mike, you know, running down the road behind me, jumping up and down, waving his arms. So I stop, and he comes and gets in the car. And looking back on it now, I believe they were probably inside doing some sort of ritual over the drugs that I was going to be taking, because it'll all tie together here in a couple minutes. But so anyhow, so we go back over to this guy named Willie's uncle Ralph's house, or his apartment, and we get in there, and I make lines out for everybody, and nobody wanted it. They did not want to do it. And here, everybody had been chomping at the bit to get this stuff, and now they don't want to do it. So I did it myself. And there was this guy that was over there, and he had these two girls with him that were in their late teens, early 20s. And he kept asking me if I wanted to buy one. And I thought he was like their pimp or something. I'm like, you mean like rent one of them? Or he's like, no, I own them. Do you want to buy one of them? And, it didn't make any sense to me. Like, how do you own somebody that you can just sell them? And knowing what I know now, it makes sense. But at the time, I couldn't wrap my head around it. So after I did a bunch of crank, everything started getting weird. And now I was heavily into drugs at this point. So I know the difference between doing crank that has been tampered with and not tampered with. And I don't think what they gave me was actually, it was crank mixed with something else, because everything, it was just getting weird. Like, it's hard to explain. But so Willie took me over to this guy named Dennis's house, or his apartment, which was 2 or 3 apartments down. And we went in there, and I asked Dennis, I was like, man, why are you guys doing this? And he looked me straight in my eyes, and he told me to let Satan have his night of rain. And that kind of flipped my lid, And so Willie, he's like, hey man, don't say that stuff to him, because I think Willie was trying to, keep me calm until they could get done what they needed done.
They didn't want you suspicious.
After that, yeah, but so everything got kind of fuzzy after that. And, that was about 10:30, around in there, 11 o'clock-ish. And the next thing I remember at that point was it's about 4 or so in the morning, and they're leading me back into Ralph's apartment. And the 2 girls that this guy was trying to sell me, they put me in the shower, and they both crawled in there with me and were washing me. And I remember I was looking down, and all the water that was coming off me was pink, and I kept asking them, why am I bleeding? Why am I bleeding? And they just, don't worry about it. It's not your blood, and it's, it didn't make sense to me. Why am I covered in blood if it's not my blood? And so they got me out of the shower after they washed me, and they tell me off, got clothes on me, and they put me in this bedroom. And the bedroom had a hasp on the outside, and they padlocked it shut once they put me in there, told me just to hang out, be cool, get some rest. Then they padlocked me in there. And just something in me told me, like, I had to get out of there. And the window also had been rigged up with a little lock on it, with a little padlock. So I grabbed hold of the bottom of the window, and I started pulling as hard as I could. And I mean, I was really strained on this window. I'm a pretty big guy. And the whole mechanism on the window, the whole locking mechanism, it shot off the window. It broke off. It went up, hit the ceiling, and it ricocheted over, and it hit the closet door. And it made a pretty good racket. So I could hear them fumbling, trying to get the lock on the outside of the door unlocked so they could get in there. And I threw the window open, and I literally dove out of the window. And they got the door open right as I was diving out the window, and they start yelling, he went out the window, he went out the window. So I run down to the end of the apartment complex, and I could hear them coming around the front. And then there's this big vacant field. There's, probably 800 yards or so across this field. And I'm convinced either God had angels come down and carry me across this field, or he gave me superhuman strength. Because I talked with Willie years later, and he said when they got around the front of the building, like, I was just gone. And there's no way they should not have been able to see me running across this field, because, it's just a big empty field. So, but anyhow, I went and I broke into a van that was in this church parking lot, and I hid out in there. And I didn't even know what I was hiding from, why I was hiding from them. I just knew I had to get away from them. And and they went out looking for me, and he said that they saw the broken window on the van, but they never thought to go and look inside of it, which, it's probably lucky for both of us that they didn't. But that was on Saturday night. I woke up Sunday morning, and like I said, it was a church van in a church parking lot. I woke up Sunday morning, and there was cops talking with the pastor of the church. And the first thing I remember hearing is that, well, it looked like they were looking for parts. And so I sat up in the front seat and just about gave these cops a heart attack because one minute there's nobody there, and all of a sudden there's this crazy looking guy sitting in the front seat.
Wow.
So they yard me out of the van and throw handcuffs on me and start taking me to jail. Now, it's one of my best friends growing up named Bubba. It was his cousin, Mark, that was the arresting officer. And I also talked with him years later, and he said that all the way to the jail, I kept babbling about Satan, dead children, and bonfires. And, he actually went back to Willie's apartment and went in there and was like, asking him, like, what'd you guys do to him? What'd you give him? And they, like, we don't know, man. He's just having a bad trip or whatever. But so that was the beginning of my downfall. That, I got a felony for breaking into the van, doing over $500 worth of damage. And it was a few weeks after that I started, the memories of what had happened that night started coming back to me.
So you didn't know anything up to that point. Like, you're covered with blood. You don't know why you were in the van, and so it didn't make sense at the time.
Yeah, none of it made sense, And but one thing about God is He'll never give you more than you can handle at a time. And he started showing me the stuff that had happened that night, but it was just in like baby steps. And so I don't know where we were. It was out in the country somewhere, and it was a lot of times when Satanists do their rituals, they'll use like a barn or something, and they'll have to. They have their altar that they can transport. They'll bring in sawhorses, set it up on the sawhorses, stuff like that. Well, this place was a built-in cement altar, like it was non-movable, and it was the whole area was cemented around it. But there's two walkways that kind of led up to like a stage area, if you will, around the altar, and then down in front of that there was a big built-in fire pit. And I remember I was up on the stage deal with there's a big person, like they're good sized fellas that were up there. They're like holding me up and keeping me there. And they had there was a pretty good crowd there. Like I don't know how many people was there, but everybody that was up on the stage area was in robes. They're wearing black, red, and white robes. And the people that were out in the audience, if you will, were, some of them had robes on, some of them were wearing street clothes, and some of them were naked. And so they had there's two children, I'd say between the ages of 3 and 5, that were chained down on the altar. And all the people that were up on the stage were taking turns raping them. And they were cutting them. And I remember they cut upside down crosses on the bottoms of their feet. And the noises that these kids made, and it was just terrific. The shrieking that the kids made, that's the noises and the smells are the two things that I remember the most about it. And it's hard to talk about, but I feel that people need to know what is happening behind closed doors. Like this goes on every day in our country. There's millions of kids that are sacrificing these rituals around the world. And this is not a local thing. This is in every city, in every county, in every state, in every country. It's a global thing. But so the people out in the audience, like the noises they were making, just shrieking. It was like, being at a concert almost, where the people were cheering, and it was just the whole thing was just terrible. I don't really know how to describe how terrible it was to see this stuff. And, like I said, I'm a big guy, and I used to really like fighting. And one of the hardest things for me to deal with after I started remembering this stuff is, why didn't I stop? Why didn't I fight to my death for these kids? That was just the sense of guilt that I had for not doing anything about it. That was one of the hardest things to deal with. But so like the torment that these kids were going through, it was so horrific that it was almost a relief to me when they finally killed them, because they stopped shrieking and screaming, and then they disemboweled the kids, and they cut their throats and they drained out their blood, and they put it in a big golden goblet, and were passing that around. People were drinking out of that, and then they cut up parts of them, their heart and stuff, and people were eating that. They were, cannibalizing these children, drinking their blood. And then they took me out in the crowd and gang raped me. And I remember crawling around on my hands and knees in the middle of these people, and they were peeing on me. They were throwing feces at me. They'd took a bunch of the blood from these kids and poured over me. And I remember crawling around, just begging and crying, asking, just pleading with them to stop, and it was like the more I cried, the more joy they got out of it. Just the noise that they're making, it was like ungodly, just the joy that they were getting out of the torment they were putting me through, and the torment they put these kids through. And it was, you could just feel the evil. And, but so they, took me down in this basement type deal, and they had these little kids laying down there all butchered up, and they're in pieces, literally. And, they said, if you ever tell anybody about this, this is what your family's going to look like. And, then they took me, they hosed me off or whatever, and then they took me back down to Willie's, and that's when I remember, they were leading me into the house and putting me in the shower. So then, it made sense why the water was pink, why I was asking whose blood it was, or, why am I bleeding? Don't worry about it. It's not your blood. Oh. So that is, the first ritual that I can remember going through. Years later, all these all happened within a few years of each other. It's like, that's when they're really going after me. I remember another time I was dating this girl down in Salem, Oregon, and on 4th of July, we went to a little town called Pacific City to supposedly watch fireworks. And we got down there, and I drove her pickup truck, just me and her in it, and we were following two other carloads of people, and I only knew one of the guys that was in those cars, and I had no clue who the other people were. And we get down there to the parking area, and we had eaten acid on the way down there. And, we get there and kind of milling around where we're parked at. And the one guy, he told me he wanted to show me something, so he takes me over to the trunk of his car, and he opens it up, and he gets under his spare tire, and there's he had some hidden compartment or something under there, and he pulls out this piece of leather that was wrapped up, and he pulls this big 18-inch knife out of it, and it was all had these occult symbols on the blade and on the handle and everything. But I didn't really recognize them for what they were then. And he starts telling me about, this knife's been in my face. You could tell from looking at it, it was very old though. And he starts telling me about how, this knife's been in my family for, 5 generations. It's been passed down. And, I'm sitting there thinking great, why are you showing me this? I could give a hoot about this stupid knife that you're showing me. And so Well, he was showing me this knife. The girl that I was with, Marie, she was over her ways talking with these other people. And so he folds it back up in this leather, puts it back in the trunk, and she comes over. She says, come on, let's go get a good seat for the show. And so we head down the beach, and at the end of the beach, it's a place called Cape Kiwanda, and there's this just enormous sand dune. I mean, it's huge. And on the way to the sand dune, at the bottom of the sand dune, there's these 3 little fires, maybe, just normal, like campfire size, a little bigger maybe. And, there's maybe 15, 20 people milling around between the fires. It looks like, just a regular bonfire party. And she wants to go up the sand dune, so we crawl about a third of the way up the sand dune, and we sit down, and, just the acid's kicking in pretty good, and we're just, looking at stuff. And I laid back in the sand, and I looked up at the sky, and it turned this weird green color. And, I'm asking her, like, man, are you seeing this? This is crazy, And off in the distance, I see what looks like a big bat flying in. And, I'm thinking to myself, like, man, that thing is huge. I mean, it's like a 10-foot wingspan on this thing. And then another one comes in, and another one, and another one. And they just start coming out of nowhere and just flying in. And it ended up, it looked like a big black tornado of bats over the area that we're at. I mean, it was huge. And then I got to look at it, and I realized that they were demons. And, you could hear them shrieking and cackling and stuff. And I sit up again, and I look down at the beach in front of us, and the 2 fires were still about the same size they were, but the one was, it's just this enormous roaring inferno of a fire. And there's about 300 people down there all of a sudden. I'm just like, what in the world is going on here, And you see headlights coming down the beach, and there was 2 SUVs, and then a white cargo van with no windows on it, and then another SUV behind it. And they were flying down the beach, and they come flying up, and they stop, probably 15, 20 yards away from the bonfire. And they start getting out of the SUVs, and everybody there is once again wearing red, white, and black robes. And I remember the one guy was wearing a red robe, and they had brought out this little altar deal and set up there. And he had this big sword, and they were, he was pointing, he pointed it in, north, south, east, west, all the directions. And you could hear people chanting and stuff down there. And then they open up that cargo van, and they drag this guy out that was naked, and they start clubbing him. They're just beating on him, and they had rods that they'd heated up in the fire, and they're burning them with it and stuff. And I'm freaking out at this point. And I'm like, are they killing that guy? And this girl that I'm with, she says, what do you care? You don't know him. What's he matter to you? You've never met him. It doesn't, And so it was, my mind felt like it was breaking, because, here, this girl that I've been dating her for a couple months, and she's just so nonchalant about this guy getting tortured down there. And they're cutting on him, and, you could hear him screeching, and then they chained him down on the altar deal and cut him open, and they cut his throat and whatnot. And they had a big goblet that they were passing around, and everybody that was wearing the robes, they all drank out of it. And then the people that were up closer to the front, they were drinking out of it. But while all this was going on, once again, the crowd was just shrieking and carrying on. It's like I said, it's like a concert atmosphere almost. And then, but the demons that were flying around the sky, man, they were just hooting and hollering and shrieking, and it was just this, terrible, ungodly racket, And this girl is just so nonchalant about, what do you care? You don't know that guy, and so it's just blowing my mind what I'm seeing. And then they took his body and they threw it onto the fire, and the I'll never forget. Like it looked like if they threw a tire on the fire, just a thick black smoke was just pouring off the fire, and I couldn't handle watching it anymore. So I laid back down on the sand, and I'm just trying to wrap my mind around what I just saw, and I laid back there for I don't know, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes or something, and I sat up again, and the fires are back down to the size they were. The SUVs are all gone. There's maybe 20, 30 people milling around down there again, but you could see in the sand where there had been just a huge crowd of people down there. And, I was like, I'm just, it was just blowing my mind what I saw. And out of the corner of my eye, I see these guys. There's a line of 13 people coming up the sand dune. And from where we're sitting at off to the right, there's a cliff that goes out there. There used to be a lighthouse or something out there. And there was a trail that I didn't know it at the time, but I've been back there since. And there's a trail that goes out there to that, the point out there. And so I see these, they're all wearing black robes and they're coming up there, like heading out there. And all of a sudden, like 4 of them break off from the main group and start beelining at the sand dune towards us. And, it freaked me out, and it gave me an adrenaline rush like nobody's business. And I had a knife in my pocket and I was trying to get that out, but I stood up and I said, Jesus, help me. And the second I said, Jesus, help me, those people stopped like they'd hit a brick wall. And they just stood there and stared at us for really a minute and a half. And then they went back down and got in the line with the rest of them. They proceeded to walk out to the point. We couldn't see them anymore. And then a few minutes later, I heard like a bell clanging. And then a couple minutes after that, I just heard this terrible shrieking coming from out of the point. And then it just all went silent again. And then this girl says, come on, let's go. Now, after I had said, Jesus, help me, up to this point, she'd been, like cozying up to me and had her arm around me, trying to talk me through what I'm witnessing. And after I said, Jesus, help me, she wouldn't touch me anymore. She wouldn't talk to me. She wanted nothing to do with me at this point. And, so we go back down the sand dune. We walk by the fires. And when we're walking by there, everybody just kind of stopped and stared at us until we got to where they couldn't see us anymore. And then, excuse me, we get back over to the cars where we're parked at. And it was just me and her over there. And then a few minutes later, everybody that we went down there with, they come walking up and they're all sweating real profusely. So I'm assuming it was them that were wearing the robes coming up the sand dune towards us. And, they popped their trunks and they started sticking stuff in the trunks, but I wasn't really paying attention with their stuff in the trunk because, my mind hurt so bad from what I just saw. I don't know 100% for sure, but I'm pretty sure that the guy that killed down by the bonfires was like the big, bringing in the guests or whatever ritual that they're doing. And I'm assuming that I was supposed to be the guy that was screaming out on the point.
Wow. But
because of God's grace and mercy, he's kept me alive through all this stuff that I've been through. And the Satanists, if they have a ritual set up and the sacrifice that they had intended falls through, then a lot of times they'll kill one of their own because they have to have the blood. And, it's very disturbing what these people do. I don't know, and it's hard to wrap your hand around or your head around, what makes these people tick. They're generational in this stuff.
Right.
And that's why I thank God every day that I come from a family of generational Christians. One of my friends that was in the movie with me, the Detestable movie, she was brought up in one of these Luciferian families where, from the time she was a little girl, she had experiments done on her. She was taken to military bases and tortured for hours on end, and, that's why, I can't imagine growing up like that. you know, to where here your family, you know, your dad's supposed to be the one protecting you, and he's the one that's putting you through this. You know, he's the one that is giving you over to these people to put you through this. You know, but you know, you see stuff like that, and it you know, it kind of breaks your mind.
Do you ever wonder why God let you go through this? Like some people would turn from this and say, why did God, you know, they would resent God. What do you think that you would say to somebody?
Well, I believe that the reason God allowed me to go through all this stuff is because of the choices that I was making in my life, and is basically he's salvaging the choices that I made and saying that if this is the path that you insist on going down, then I'll keep you alive through it, just so that you have a more powerful testimony when you do come to me. Because, you know, it's the choices that we make in life, you know, that's where it goes along with the free will is, you know, like we have our own free will. We can make the choices. It's not necessarily the right choice, but if God wants to use you, then he'll be able to use any choice that you make for his glory and honor. I think God lets, you know, we have free will. And, you know, some people use their free will to worship Satan. You know, some people, that's all they know. You know, they're like the generational, they're brought up knowing this stuff. But, you know, you got to ask, you know, the people that try to blame every bad thing that happens in the world on God. You know, well, if God's, you know, this loving, caring God, why does he let this happen? And my question to them is, why do you let it happen? What are you doing to stop it? You know, it gives us all the tools for spiritual warfare that we need right in the Bible. Are you on your knees praying against this stuff daily? You know, there's a lot more to it than, you know, why did God let this happen? And, you know, it's like God, he gave us power over this stuff, you know. We have authority over demons, you know. He gave us authority over them in the name of Jesus Christ and through the power of his shed blood. You know, that's why, you know, you have to be pleading the blood of Jesus over yourself and your family every day, you know. And it's not so much why did God let this happen? It's like, why has the church become so weak that they allow it to happen?
Right.
Why aren't they teaching spiritual warfare in church? Why aren't they giving people the tools that they need to fight against this stuff? You know, there'd be a lot less of this stuff if the church would use their authority given to them and fought against this stuff in the spirit. You know, it's a spiritual battle. You know, it says right in the Bible, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood. You know, we're not fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting spiritually. I know that there's a great number of soldiers that have gone AWOL from the fight. You know, like the police, you know, they're the majority of the time the police have been infiltrated. You know, like Satanism, it's in every aspect of life, you know, from the White House down. You know, you got the elite Luciferians, and then, you know, there's people under them. It's set up like a pyramid structure, you know, and it goes all the way down to the little podunk hillbillies that are holding down the ritual grounds out in the middle of nowhere. You know, and they're just like the workers. You know, their job is to make sure nobody comes to the ritual sites and to clean up after the rituals are done. You know, but they're just workers, you know.
Yeah, and you may have been targeted because you walked away from God.
I feel like the reason why God allowed this to happen to me is, for one, because I was living in the world. I wasn't pleading the blood of Jesus over me. I wasn't doing my part to keep myself protected. I was living in the world's darkness. I've never been a Satanist. I've never worshiped Satan a day in my life. But for years, I was working overtime for Satan through selling drugs. For, you know, I used to be muscle for hire. You know, you gave me enough money, I'd walk into McDonald's and slap someone in the face with a baseball bat. You know, I mean, I led a very rough and tumble life. You know, like I said, I'm not proud of any of this stuff, but I'm not ashamed to talk about it because it'll show you what God pulled me out of, what God has been giving me for. Because I did so many terrible things to so many people over the years. Like, I honestly felt for a while, even growing up in the church and knowing about God and his forgiveness, I felt that I'd done such terrible things and I'd destroyed so many lives through selling drugs or through beating people up or doing whatever, that I was beyond forgiveness, that I was such a terrible person that there's no way God could forgive me for doing the stuff that I'd done. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are like that. They underestimate God's grace and God's mercy. You know, it says in the Bible that God's not willing that any should perish. You know, even the Satanists, you know, he still wants them. You know, he wants them. He wants them to come back into the fold, you know. And yeah, like there's the way I knew that God had really got a hold of me is for years after all this stuff had happened to me, I had an unquenchable desire in me to kill Satanists. Like if I was at a party and I found out you were a Satanist, I was going to throttle you. And, you know, and now I don't want revenge on the Satanists. I don't want to kill them anymore. I want to see them set free and delivered.
Amen.
And to start serving Jesus, you know. But it's a hard thing to forgive somebody that has done something like that to you. And that's, you know, where you gotta fall on God. You know, you gotta call on God to give you strength. Because, like I said, He won't give you any more than you can handle. And, you know, there's a lot of, you know, He'll walk you through what needs to be done in your life. We need to get in the battle, you know. You need to put on the armor of God every day and fight in the Spirit. And the church has become pathetic, you know. Like most preachers are content with just keeping the pews full and the offering plate coming in, as opposed to preaching the truth. You know, like I've literally heard pastors say, "Well, I can't talk about that because half of my parish would leave."
Mm-hmm.
I've seen God's grace and mercy. I've felt God's grace and mercy. I've been in the darkest places that you could possibly be, and even there, you can feel God's hand. You know, there's nowhere on earth you can go that He can't reach you. I know most Satanists don't enjoy what they're doing. You know, if they're generational, it's not humanly possible to enjoy raping a child. It's not humanly possible to enjoy killing a child or go through these blood rituals or be raped yourself, you know, and that's what they go through their entire lives. That's what they think is normal. And, you know, like just try calling out to God. Try calling out to Jesus, because He's the only thing that's going to help you get through this stuff. You know, like I tried for years to get over this stuff on my own, you know. I did drugs. I drank excessively. Going out, running after women, you know, anything I could do to try to fill that void in my life. And none of it worked. It only made my problems worse. The only thing that gave me any peace in my life was when I finally had enough of me and I called out to Jesus and I handed over my life to God. That is the only thing that gave me any peace. That's the only thing that helped me to deal with any of the stuff that I've been through in my life. And, you know, drugs aren't going to help you. Going to psychologists isn't going to help you. Therapy is not going to help you. None of that stuff is going to help you unless you have Jesus Christ as the center of your recovery.
So the film is detestablefilm.com. You can see Detestable. Guy, what's the other place that they can find it?
They can go watch it on Vimeo. I think if you just go on detestablefilm.com, it'll get you in touch if you want to order the DVD or if you just want to rent it off Vimeo. This movie was made as a screaming wake-up call to the church. And it's the church that really needs to wake up and start fighting this stuff in the spirit. There's only so much you can do in the flesh. But, you know, Jesus has given us authority over these things. And I believe that right now, like with Pizzagate and everything that's coming out, that God is starting to pull the veil back on the world of darkness, and they're starting to be exposed for who they are and what they do. We have to stop this stuff. You know, it's detestable.
Guy Kallberg, thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. I know it's tough, and it takes a lot of courage to actually recite it over again for people to see it.
Well, thank you for having me on, Jim. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do, and I just, you know, I want to see an end to this stuff, and I want to see more people going to heaven.
Hey, thank you for listening. My website again is jimdukeperspective.com, and we'll see you next time.